Hello and welcome back to Widowed AF. You're here with your host Rosie Gilmoss, and joining me for today's conversation is Nicky, and you're joining me from Manchester, aren't you, Nicky?
I am in the hills in Manchester, so yeah, North Manchester.
Well, hello and welcome to the podcast. I'm delighted that you've come on today. Now, we're going to have two conversations today. The first one is going to be Nicky is going to talk us through her story, and that is about how she lost her husband Andy back in 2020 to COVID. We're also going to touch a little bit on an app or two apps that Nicky has developed for widows, but we're going to come back to that at the end. So for now, Nicky, this is your story. It's your opportunity to tell it. So in your own time.
Great, thank you. So I met Andy, my soulmate, the love of my life, in 2002 during the Commonwealth Games in Manchester. So he was a press officer for Greater Manchester Police. I was working in events. Our worlds actually collided on datingdirect.com. So we were early adopters of technology way before anyone met anyone online. And we didn't tell people we'd met online.
So it was taboo back then, wasn't it?
Absolutely. And we had the most amazing first date. And on that first date in Manchester, he told me the tracks he wanted played at his funeral.
Bloody hell.
I know. And I thought, oh my God, he thinks I'm a keeper, I think. And little did I know that actually I'd be playing those tracks a lot sooner than I ever thought would ever happen. But thank God I remembered them, because that could have been a bit awkward, couldn't it?
I want to know what they are now.
Hmm?
I want to know what they are
Okay,
now.
so Many Rivers to Cross and Ascension by Peter Gabriel. So just two beautiful pieces of music. And he was a real Renaissance man. So he was a writer. He wrote lots of music blogs. He created a record label. He photographed everything all the time. I mean, so much so that during our lives together, I was like, will you stop bloody photographing it? Can we just like live it? But actually, I'm so glad he did. 2002 we met. About 3 months later, we had a fabulous, filthy weekend in Amsterdam together. And he asked me, oh God, I miss those days. And he asked me to move in, and I did. And then we got married 2004 in Jamaica on a beachfront. And life was absolutely perfect. I remember sitting at our honeymoon destination, crying tears of happiness that I'd finally, he was my John to my Yoko. We found each other and we were destined to be together. And we had a riotous time. We had lots of fun and lots of adventures. We traveled the world, and then we tried for a baby. And we had an awful lot of fun trying, but it wasn't happening. So with a little medical help a few years later, Finn, my beautiful, now 15-year-old, burst onto the scene in 2007. Unfortunately, the day after my mother-in-law's birthday, because that could have so saved me buying a present. But anyway, and then we went through the madness that is raising a kid. And I remember Andy saying to me about 6 weeks ago, and it's like a bloody bomb has gone off. And it's like, yeah, it is, isn't it? You know, there is a reason Finn is an only child, because he didn't sleep for, I think, 6 years.
There's a reason there's a big gap between my second and third.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm in awe of anyone who's got more than one. Do you know what I mean? I just think, what the hell were you thinking of? And thank God that ship has now sailed. So, and then we had the wild adventure of being a family and all the joy and delights and tears and frustrations and everything that goes with that. I set up Don't Panic Events, which is my events daytime job business. And I set that up in 2005. Andy decided that looked a lot easier than working for the police. Can't blame him. And joined in 2007, I think, and did all our creative and branding. So we built a business together. We traveled the world putting on bigger corporate award shows. And then eventually I had to sack my husband, which was a little difficult, I'm gonna be honest.
No.
Well, because he wasn't an entrepreneur and he's not ambitious, and so he was stifling my creativity. So I very cleverly, as wives often do, made it think it was his idea.
I was going to say, did you make him think it was his idea?
And told him he needed to stay home and write a novel, which he did. And although it's never finished, which is really sad. And one of my girlfriends said to me, "Oh, you should finish it." It's like, I've read it. It's filthy. I am not finishing that. My
Oh,
dad does
is it?
not need to read that stuff. So yeah, he became the world's best stay-at-home dad, and he did every school walk. He cooked every meal because I was, and some might argue still am, domestically challenged. Um,
Yeah, I relate.
I've got good stuff. Yeah, so he was, gosh, and it's funny how life works out. Like, he was there for Finn's formative years, and I've been here to pick up the teen years. And I never knew it was going to pan out like this. Obviously, I'd have treasured every moment of every day sooner if I had. But yeah, so we were living our best lives. We were traveling around the world. April 2017, we were in Sydney on holiday, seeing a friend of mine who's also a widow. So her and Andy's late husband were best friends at school. So we went out to Sydney to pay our respects because he died of a brain hemorrhage very, very sadly. And ironically, we got out there and she told us his ashes were at Man City ground in Manchester. It's like, could have saved ourselves an absolute fortune.
I'm sure she appreciated you actually making the
Yes,
journey
yeah.
much more,
Well, and
though.
also a holiday to Sydney is never a bad thing. So yeah, we
I've
had an
been.
absolute ball with it. But when she picked us up from the airport, she said, "Oh, I need to tell you something. I'm, I, I've started a relationship with someone else," and it was so she found her chapter 2, and that was Adam, her husband's best friend, Rob, in Australia. And he's wonderful and fabulous. And she was really concerned about telling me. And I was like, why would you not? But the beauty of that conversation is that it made me and Andy have that conversation that night. So we were like, if anything happens to you, I want you to move forward. I want you to find a way forward. I don't want you to be on your own forever. So that was a really fundamental moment in our relationship. I had no idea that literally 3 months later, July 2017, I got back from a business trip. I've been organising an event in London, and I come back, and I just knew something was wrong with Andy. He wasn't himself, and that's not him. And he said, "Oh, I've had these chest pains," and I was like, "Am I literally?" When you feel like someone's walked over your grave, that kind of shiver
Mhm.
up your back of like, "What the heck?" So I said, "Well, have you called the doctors?" And of course he hadn't, because he's a
No,
man and they're useless. Sorry for any men listening, but it's true.
they can be.
Our little
We'll
secret.
play diplomatic.
Yes. Anyway, because he didn't do it, I frog marched him to the GPs the next day, and those were in the days when you could actually get an appointment with your GP and go and see them, which is, a whole different world these days, isn't it? So I took him in and I sat in the waiting room because I thought, he's a grown adult, he can probably do this himself. And he went in and then he skipped out like 15 minutes later going, "Oh, it's all right. Like, the GP told me I'm just stressed. It's anxiety." Now, that guy couldn't spell anxious, let alone be it. Do you know what I mean? He was the most laid back kind of guy I've ever met. And it was like, you're not stressed. You've got nothing to be stressed about. So anyway, 3 GP visits later, while he still had chest pains, I insisted. I walked in on the 3rd one and I kind of, nope, we're doing it my way. And I insisted they did an ECG. So we're sat, and they do it down the phone. It's very technological and fabulous these days.
What, an ECG down the phone?
Yeah, so they do the
No.
ECG and they put the things on the phone, and then anyway, I could see the nurse's face drop, and she went, "It's having a what?" I was like, "Ah!" He was having a heart attack and had been for days, basically.
No.
Yeah, his heart had
Oh,
been
poor
draining.
guy.
So he gets blue lighted. I've got Finn with me in the waiting room. It's awful. He gets blue lighted to hospital. And by the time I follow on in my car, freaking out, and I get to MRI in Manchester, and he's been in, they've fitted 4 stents. He's fine. He's in bed, laughing and smiling, complaining about being hungry. I deliver food. He stays for a couple of days. Then I go and pick him up, and I take him home, and we're toasting our lucky escape. So we're sat on the sofa, X Factor on or whatever. He'll kill me for telling you that, but and everything is good, or so I think. Although I think he had a premonition. I think he knew, because he said to me, "Whatever you do, always wear those rings." So this is my engagement ring and the wedding ring, and I've moved it to my other hand.
I was going to say, yeah,
Yeah,
so that's on your right hand.
yeah.
I'm in the process of having mine made into a ring to wear on my right hand. I just feel this need to wear them
Yeah.
again.
So, but the other ring is actually Andy's ashes. So,
Is it?
I kind of, yeah, he's
Mm.
always with me. So we're toasting the lucky escape, and he went to bed that night. He was tired. I mean, you never sleep well in hospital, etc.
No.
So I didn't think too much of it. Now Andy snored like a frigging trooper. So very often, if I'm honest, we'd sleep in separate beds. That's just how you make a marriage work.
Yep.
And I walked upstairs. He was snoring his head off. I went downstairs and got a glass of wine and sat in the spare bed, dozed off, and then heard this terrible sound. I went charging upstairs. He was having a heart attack, another. And I'll never forget ever the look in his eyes as he looked at me, pleading. I called 999. They taught me through how to do CPR. Now, the good news is I can do CPR. The bad news is I'm not actually very good at it, I don't think. So, yeah. So
Who
therefore,
of us is,
well,
Hope
exactly.
we have to use it.
Yeah, well, I'm hoping I never have to do it again. In fact, I've told any man I've dated since, I'm walking off if you have a heart attack. That's it.
You're on your own.
I'm done. Yeah, see ya. Um, so I did CPR for the longest 30 minutes of my life till the ambulance arrived. Probably worth noting for comedic value that I was stark bollock naked at this point. And so I had to answer the door, and unluckily for me, or luckily, I don't know, delete is appropriate. They couldn't get an ambulance, so they sent a fireman. So
Oh,
I opened the door naked to a fireman, not quite the way that I was hoping that fantasy would work out, but anyway. Um, so they arrived, and then obviously the ambulance arrived a few minutes later, and etc. And they worked on him for half an hour, 45 minutes in the house. Again, it felt like a week. They took him to another hospital within Shore. He was in ICU. They put him into an induced coma. And I literally had no idea that you could get a brain injury from a heart attack. Like, who would know that? You just wouldn't.
no, I
And I
didn't have a clue.
remember the consultant taking me to one side to say, "This story does not have a happy ending." Right. He is
Ouch.
gonna be severely brain damaged when we bring him round, and I want you to be prepared for that. The team at Wythenshawe are incredible, like absolutely incredible. They're dealing with people in the darkest periods of their life, and they did everything they could to make it easier for me, but it was still utterly terrifying, heartbreaking, etc. And I had to make a really difficult decision. So Andy was brought around from a coma, was clearly brain damaged, didn't know who I was, didn't know who he was, didn't know where he was. But thank God he didn't. You know what I mean? Because I'm sort of forever grateful for that, in the sense that he would have hated every second of where he ended up. I mean, he eventually, we tried rehab. The NHS threw everything at it, and I cannot fault them. You know, we tried absolutely everything. Some friends of mine did a crowdfunder and raised thousands of pounds to help support me through this. Because the other thing you
Mhm.
need to know, and my soapbox moment is about to happen.
You crack on. That's what this is for. You get on your soapbox.
Thank you. I'd like to. Is get a power of attorney, get a will. You know, me and Andy had a jointly owned business. I couldn't take any money out of that business in a tax efficient way because he was a director and I would have had to pay him dividends, which would have been fine. But we had separate accounts because I didn't want Andy to know what I spent on shoes and handbags.
Same.
Not my wisest decision. So for 3 years, all of our savings, and I mean all of our savings, were in his ISA, and I couldn't access those because you just don't know what's around the corner, do you? And had I known, I'd have operated in a very different way. So power of attorney, ISA, joint accounts, all of that stuff, particularly if you're at our age and starting again, is massively important.
And it's interesting hearing you talk about the sort of financial paralysis that you're in because your husband isn't dead, but he's actually not there. And actually, I'm drawing a parallel with my situation because Ben's body wasn't found.
Yeah.
So although he was very dead, I wasn't able to access life insurance. He had a business. I wasn't a director. His mum was. We were able to kind of get me in as a director. It was all very, very complicated. And I had no access to any money. I was on maternity leave myself at the time. So you are completely kind of frozen in time. And
Yeah.
you can't go back to the life you had and continue to work in the same way because you don't, life changes beyond all recognition. And yeah, I mean, John and I both have very, very thorough wills with, who we want to look after the children in great detail, because obviously now it's even more complicated. But I completely agree that, getting your affairs in order, even if you don't think there's any chance of anything bad happening to you in the next 20 years, you just don't know.
It's absolutely critical. And I think that's the one thing as widows we appreciate, is that life can change in a heartbeat.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yep.
you need to make sure that your future, your kids' future, your house, everything is secure. So so then I went into this I can only describe it as purgatory.
Mm.
This anticipatory grief. So I've been told I wasn't getting a happy ending. Andy was moved to a nursing home. He had little quality of life. I mean, very little. Completely incontinent, couldn't walk,
Oh, God.
etc. But also slightly more disturbing than that. He was obviously, he had a brain injury. He was completely confused. He didn't know where he was. And some days I'd go to visit, and he'd think he was on a cruise ship. We spent a lot of our lives on cruise ships. Yeah, I completely understand why. And then other times he'd be violent, he'd be aggressive. And it wasn't him. I lost my husband in effect in 2017. We never had, although ironically, the last visit I had before COVID, because I could see it starting to happen in the headlines and thought, so I went up to the nursing home, and the nursing home were amazing. I mean, they did everything they could to make things right. Although, really quite a funny story. A few weeks before COVID happened, they had a Gary Barlow tribute act perform at the nursing home. I was like, has he not suffered enough?
I was going to
It's
say that.
like,
I might be a big fan.
he hated every second of it. It was hysterical. And I do have a photo of him looking particularly pissed off.
Which I hope.
So yeah, anyway, I went up to the nursing home, and it was a day when he was lucid and he was beautiful, and I saw flashes of my Andy. And I got on the bed with him and literally, sat over him and held him. And we had the most beautiful last visit together. I didn't know it was going to be our last visit. But as soon as COVID hit the headlines, I knew,
Mm.
I knew that was the beginning of the end. Um, and I didn't know how that was going to be. But the irony is, if Andy had the choice when he knew his current state, he'd have walked into a ward full of COVID to
Mm.
deal with it, and that's, I think there's a whole bigger conversation around assisted suicide and, everything else is he would never have chosen that life the way it ended. And I feel terribly sad and guilty that I couldn't do anything about that. But actually, I think COVID, although it was heartbreaking to lose him finally. And here's the funny thing about anticipatory grief. I thought that 3 years of anticipatory grief would get me on the guest list, if you like. I'd be at the front of the queue, I'd be over it, it would be fine. Apparently not.
Don't work like that, does it?
Hits you like a friggy. I mean, obviously, again, from knowing that you'd lost someone, but not actually physically
Yeah.
it. Um, you
And
know,
almost everybody I speak to, people who've lost somebody they love to a terminal illness, they say much like you have, that they anticipated that because they'd done so much of their grieving leading up to it, that yes, it would almost, I mean, it was still going to be awful, but that they would cope or
yeah,
it would be less painful. But it isn't. It's still an
yeah.
enormous, horrible shock.
And I don't think you can fully. I think your brain saves you from comprehending
Of
what's
course. Oh,
actually happening.
this is why we make up the tea for paramedics and answer the door naked and things like this,
Yeah,
because in the moment of trauma and when you're under a massive sort of stress, you do some very odd things, and your brain protects you in ways that you don't even think it can, to be honest.
yeah. No, I mean we are beautiful, complex creatures, aren't we? But
Yeah,
yeah. So I didn't expect it to hit me like it did, but it did, like a freight train. I suppose the one beauty was it was during COVID, so it was lockdown, so there was no school runs. I could drink at 2 in the afternoon if I wanted to, without making it look like a herbal tea. So, me and Finn just hunkered down and got through it with a bit of help from Joe Wicks. Um, but yeah, it was, I bought a hot tub. We sat in the garden under the stars. We talked about daddy, etc. And then I started to embrace my widow status. And I did loads of counseling. Like, the one thing I would say to anyone listening to this, if they're in those early raw stages, is get a counselor. Like, and
I
I mean, I've thrown so much money at counselling for me and for Finn.
the
And
listeners can't see my hands in the air with, because I'm so on board with this. And you talk about the financial cost of counselling. You know what? 2 bottles of wine is very expensive too.
yeah.
And I was doing,
Counselling works better. Believe me, I've tried
yeah,
both options
same,
on a
same.
almost daily basis at one point. But yeah, no, counselling is, and I threw loads of money at counselling me and Finn separately.
Right.
And I think that's helped that I now have a 15-year-old who is, well, he's more well adjusted than I am, if I'm honest. Do you know what I mean? He's not been broken by this life-changing incident. And I feel for kids, our kids have been through more than most people ever need to go through in life, and it's so tough. But he's incredibly well adjusted because I threw a load at it.
That's
In
given me
terms
the. I talk quite a bit on the podcast about the sort of the tingles in my face, and that really, I really feel that because I can sense this sort of this, I guess, pride and this sense of achievement if we manage to get these children who have gone through one of the most traumatic things that can happen to a child, and then you look at them and you go, "Oh my gosh, you're all right." Like, we know there's going to be ups and downs. They're
of course
teenagers,
there is.
but to get them kind of to cope with this enormous devastating loss and be able to go out and kind of live a normal life, not be, we always say to the children, or we try and, it is something terrible that happened to you, but it doesn't define who you're going to be.
Mhm.
This is, it is not a, it is a catastrophic event, but it doesn't define the rest of your life.
Although I do think it defines them in the sense that it makes them bigger and better human beings.
maybe you're
You
right.
know, like
Yeah.
if they've been through that, they've learned a huge life lesson
Mm,
of
yeah.
life isn't forever and seize the day, seize the moment. And I also think my relationship with Finn is stronger than it's ever been because we got thrown together in this maelstrom of grief. And he is like my best friend, although one of my other
Oh.
friends says to me, "He's not your best friend, he's your son. You need to put your."
Oh, but they
But
become fully functioning adults or humans, I suppose,
yeah.
when they get into the teens. I mean, you still get grunted at occasionally, right? But you can have a proper conversation with them, and it isn't always about Minecraft, which is nice.
Or Lego, or
No.
superheroes.
Pokemon.
Yeah, although I must say Guardians of the Galaxy is worth a watch, number 3. But anyway, yeah, no, I'm so in awe and proud of the boy that he's become, and he hasn't let grief define him.
Mm,
And although, do you know what? Actually, me embracing my widow status has helped me massively. In terms of I've created businesses, which obviously we'll talk about later, but it's also made me realize who I am
mhm,
and what my life looks like now. And I think there's something to be said for that. So Widowed and Young, which I know you know about and have been an absolutely incredible resource for me. They saved my life. I've met a couple of really cool widows that I would never have met otherwise, and we hang out and have the most riotous times and, many Negronis are necked or whatever. But it's, and one of them is an investor in my apps, and, I think reach for anyone listening in the early stages of this, get counseling, reach out to support groups. Good Grief Trust is great, Widowed and Young are great. There's a whole world of resources out there. And Facebook groups, there's millions of Facebook groups about widows, all of which provide 24/7 support to people. If you wake up at 4 in the morning and you're feeling lonely, there's someone online.
yeah.
And and I think that stuff's really important.
And
You know
also within these groups, you find your tribe, don't you? Because there'll
Yeah,
be people who are processing their grief very differently to you. There'll be people who are at very different stages of their grief. And what you tend to do is sort of, I think described it as somebody, you maybe see somebody comment on something and think, oh yeah, they sound like my kind of people. And then you sort of interact a bit, and then we create offshoots and in-person meetups and, WhatsApp groups. And we talk quite a lot on here about this feeling as though you're the unloved troll under the bridge, that
yes,
we're fit
yeah.
in the world. And by realizing that you're not alone, and this is, what we're doing here really, it's kind of opening up our world and saying to people who are widowed, "Look, you're still human, like you're still loved and valid and worth it and wanted, and come talk about, talk to people about it." And I do think this power of the tribe, as I kind of call it, of meeting your widow tribe, it is so valuable.
Oh, completely. It has helped me and helped me reconcile my new role in life and
Mm,
and the way, and given me, a whole network of people who get it, who understand.
yeah.
Because I honestly don't. I mean, God, we've all been there, haven't we? Where people go, "Oh yeah, I lost my dog," or
Oh
"I lost
yeah.
my dad," or and it's like, yeah, all of
Fish.
that is and valid and has its place, and I will never decry anyone else's grief. But um, losing your soulmate, the person you thought, you don't just lose them, you lose your future. You lose the parent of your child. You lose, there is no way to reconcile that, and that takes time
Yeah.
and space and support. But there are incredible resources out there. So sometimes you feel so alone, but actually you're not. And the harsh reality of life is the one inevitability is we will all lose someone we love. So
Well, this
you
is
just
it.
got
If you're in a romantic relationship, chances are one of you is going to die. And,
yeah,
it's unlikely you're going to die at the same time. So it might not be until your old age, which is what we all hope for. But one of you is going to be widowed, so to have these conversations about death, and this conversation that you were able to have about him wanting you to find happiness again.
Yeah.
John and Sarah had that conversation, and I do think, I don't know what Ben would have said. I think he would have wanted me to be happy. I don't think he'd have wanted me to struggle
Yeah.
through life alone. And I think he would be delighted with how John loves me and loves the children. But having the conversation beforehand, it kind of almost gives you permission, I suppose.
Yeah. Very much so.
Yeah, and another thing I wanted to just quickly touch on was you talked about COVID and how, had he been able to, he probably would have walked into the COVID ward himself. And you sort of touched about assisted dying, and it is a topic we've covered. We spoke to a widow about her husband going to Dignitas, and she sent us an anonymous letter which we read out, and it really opened my mind up to kind of how badly we deal with death in this country. And nobody should be made to suffer. It's a very controversial and divisive subject, but I do think it's a conversation that we need to be having again out in the open.
I agree. I mean, at the end of the day, I have a very cute cockapoo pooch, but when she gets to the end of her life, you do the decent thing, and do it in a humane and a respectful way. And that we don't do that with humans is, a challenging one. I think that will change in time. I think, life and legalities and everything move on in all directions of life, don't they? And I'm sure at some point those conversations will be had. They're not had yet. But I think that, there's a lot for a power of attorney, a living will, those kind of documents and agreements probably should be.
I think it's definitely going to be a sort of when, not if. It's turning the slow wheels of government, isn't it? And it's, again, because it's such a divisive issue, everyone's a bit scared of it. What does life look like for you and Finn now? Because it must have been, it's a very difficult story, isn't it? Because initially Finn had this dad that was his main primary carer, and whereas a lot of families, the dad tends to be the one, I don't want to stereotype, but it's often the one that's home for maybe bedtime. And so the loss, whilst catastrophic, doesn't impact their sort of day-to-day life as it might if it was mother, maybe. But in your situation, Finn's dad was the one who was with him all the time. So, and then although he didn't die when he had the heart attack, he was taken from him. So that must have taken a lot of adjustment.
It did. And I had to make the very difficult decision not to let Finn see Andy. So Andy was in a hugely bad state, and wasn't Andy. That's the sheer reality of it. And I went every week to visit, which was utterly heartbreaking. God, those 3 years of driving up to the nursing home, crying, and driving home crying. And bless his mum went up every week on this massive mission from the other side of Manchester on 2 trams and a bus and whatever else. But I had to make the really difficult decision not to let Finn visit, because I knew that wasn't going to be productive. I knew Andy wasn't going to get some miraculous miracle moment and realize who he was. And to walk into a room as a then 9-year-old and your dad not know who you are and you not recognize your dad could have only been utterly heartbreaking. And I did have to make some really tough choices, but I'm glad, and I think I did the right thing. But then me and Finn had to learn how to, I am not the world's most maternal creature, and I think anyone who knows me would recognize. I'd admit that, and that's fine. But I had to learn how to parent. I also had to learn how to cook, for God's sake, because COVID happened and restaurants were closed. It wasn't even McDonald's wasn't even open at one point. So yeah. I'm not Nigella, don't worry. But you know what I mean? It was like I had to learn how to parent. And me and Finn are closer than anything in the world. In fact, I'm already dreading empty nest when he flies the coop. I keep threatening to keep him at home forever. But we've become the tightest little unit ever. And that's good. And I think Andy would love that. Andy would love because I think Andy had concerns about the fact that I seem to prefer to be hanging out in Las Vegas rather than at home. Wondering why. Um,
Depends what
you know,
pointing moment I'm in, but I
I
can see the appeal.
I was blessed because my events business was international, so I could travel lots, have lots of fun. It was a very nice lifestyle. I always joke that I got the better end of the stick. He stayed home to be stay-at-home dad, and I was in Las Vegas, Dubai, or New York. I think I got the better end.
But don't you think now, retrospectively as well, how wonderful that Finn had that time with his
Yes,
dad? Because,
exactly.
you know, knowing what you know now, to be able, you know, to have him there and to kind of have these core memories that you've got,
Definitely.
or that he has, I think, you know, how wonderful that he has that.
And
So,
Andy, as I said, he photographed every minute of our lives, and he created a photo book for every year of Finn's
oh man, I
life.
did this for 2 years and then I lost interest back in, I don't know, 2010 or something. I keep thinking I'm going to do it again.
Oh, real. I'm a rubbish photographer. Whenever anyone follows me on Instagram, I think, oh, shame.
I'm going to follow you now.
I'm really going to disappoint. But yeah, so Andy did all of that, but they had that time together. And it was funny because when I put Finn into counselling, I chatted to his counsellor, and she said, you know, there's never a good time for this to happen. But the fact that he was 10, I think 11 at that point, no, 9. The fact that he was 9 meant he could comprehend what had happened, but wasn't in teenage hormonal hell. So,
Mm.
I'm not saying, you know, it's good for a 9-year-old to lose their parent, of course it's not, but it seems to be the sweet spot of not screwing them up for life.
And they can remember, because I know with the younger children, I mean, Tabby particularly, she was only 6 months old when
Oh,
Ben died. She has no core memories. She
no.
has no real memory. Every single one is a shared memory. And you know, we talk about him, lots of photographs and that sort of thing. But I do feel bad for her, and like, you know, because even Hector, who was only 5, he's still got those. He can still remember things. They're a little bit hazy, but they can still remember them. So I'm really glad that Finn has that of his dad,
Yeah,
because I was,
me
you know,
too.
it's horrible to think of them not being able to remember them. The thing I wanted to just draw back to, Nicky, if that's okay, is you talked earlier about your friend out in Australia who had lost her husband and had met somebody else, and that kind of fear of telling you that she
Yeah.
felt. That's a very, very common fear. I've mentioned in a previous podcast that I was a really big, brave girl, and I texted Ben's mum when I met John. And then we both went out for dinner and both announced we were in a relationship on our Facebooks, and then turned our phones off and hyperventilated for a while. And actually, it shows how afraid we are of what the world will think of us
Mhm.
if we have the audacity to love again. And that it comes encapsulated in shame, because we feel that we can't vocalize these needs and wants without kind of people thinking we didn't love them, or that we're, you know, this harlot, or, you know, what the fuck is the matter with you kind of thing. Now, this has prompted you to do something with this professionally, hasn't it? And I wondered if you would just talk a little bit about what you've done with your apps.
Absolutely. So when I embraced my widow status, I started to go to quite a lot of widow meetups. Who knew how riotous they can be? Because they can,
I know.
can't they? I mean, the one thing about widows, which I adore, is that they know to live in the moment, and they do.
Absolutely.
And there is nothing. I went to the Way Widowed and Young AGM in Glasgow, and there was nothing quite like seeing 50 widows and widowers get down on a dance floor, I can tell you. And do you know what the collective term for widows is? An avalanche, which I
An avalanche.
absolutely love. Like,
I
it's
love this. I
just
didn't know that.
yeah, it's absolutely perfect, and it describes entirely what, a group of widows is, which I really like. Anyway, at these kind of widow meetups, inevitably, conversations turn to, "Are you dating again? Have you
Mhm.
considered dating again? How does that work?" And obviously, you know, after the initial shock and awe of being widowed happens, your thoughts turn to dating again. Um, and then it's how you communicate that. So, as an example, I was really nervous about telling my mother-in-law. She's been incredibly supportive and wonderful. She's a widow herself, has remarried, so I think that helps. And also, she very kindly said to me, "You're young, you need to move." So, yeah. So at these conversations, running alongside widow meetups, I was also on Tinder, Bumble, Hinge, anything else that was available online, and obviously I've met Andy, my husband, online in 2002. My goodness, online dating has moved on somewhat, hasn't it, in 20 years? So, yeah, the world of dick pics and ghosting is a whole thing that I knew nothing about, but I do now and still have the photographs.
You
And
do now, wish you
Apple
didn't.
Stars really good. Although I've got this brilliant thing that if I get dick pic, I send it to my gay best friend. Really.
Oh,
Um, but anyway, so I was on those, and it's like the Wild West out there. It's frightening. It's a scary place to be. I mean, I've done quite a lot of dates. I'm quite sociable and extrovert, so I'd rather be out than in. It's fine. But I've had some awful dates, some fun dates, and a few, as I call them, delicious distractions from grief. So yeah, and I do think it does make you live in the moment. So while all this was going on, and I was at a widowed meetup, I thought, "God, there has to be a better way." And obviously, the phrase "chapter two" is used extensively within widow circles. What I quite like.
it's divisive, isn't it? Some people love it and
Oh
some people
yeah, no,
hate it.
it's divisive. I know it is, but it says what it does on the tin.
But you can't please all the widows all the time. This is we are even harder to please than the general public. So
Yeah. And I get that some people won't sign up because they don't like the phrase. Well, that's fine. The beauty of it is, I mean, I genuinely feel that widows and widowers are uniquely placed to understand each other
yeah,
because we've been through the same thing. If you come into my house, it is full of photographs of Andy. My heart is full of memories. And it takes a very big man, if you like. I mean, not that I found one of those, but anyway, um, to understand and respect that.
yeah,
And I think that's where the kind of whole chapter two
yeah.
thing fits in. So yeah, I launched chapter two. My day job is running an events business, so I'm quite well connected. I raised investment because I knew that I needed a lot of advertising and PR to get this to fly the way I wanted it to. And yeah, we've got so we launched chapter two in November. It was completely free for 2 months for everybody to get some critical mass, which obviously we need because we've got widows right across the UK. And then we launched premium access in January, and we've now got over 3,000 members signed up and active. We had over 500 messages sent on Saturday, which is amazing.
Ooh,
I know. I was thinking, what on earth are you all up to? You should be watching the coronation. But
or
anyway,
a party and had a few little drinks, haven't they?
I
Got a
mean,
bit brave.
Charles is a widow, isn't he? So it's fine. There's a tenuous link there somewhere. So yeah, but during setting up chapter two and the joy that's been with that, we've been really lucky. We've had loads of PR, a few podcasts. I'm hoping for some TV at some point soon. Um, and during that, we set up forums, and people were chatting on the forums about various widow topics. One of which is widows' fire, which obviously I'm sure you must have talked about on other.
We have. We mentioned it a little bit. Lulu put me on the spot, actually, sort of forced the issue. And we have talked a little bit about it. Yeah. And it's something I would like to tentatively do maybe a full episode about because, again, I don't expect everybody to want to share the more salacious aspects of their lives because that's, for some people, that's very private. But I do think it's a topic that is very, very important because, as I said earlier, your wants and needs don't change. And then sometimes they become exacerbated because you are so desperately searching for something that isn't painful and sad and human contact and, physical contact. And sometimes that comes as sexual urges, not always, but for some people. But the other thing is, it can cause us to act very, as we feel, are very out of character. And sometimes I know of people who've been put in quite unsafe situations because they've been driven by this sort of chaos that is grief.
I totally recognise that. I know I behaved quite erratically for 6-8 months after I'd
Yeah.
lost Andy.
And you can be met with sort of disapproval and judgment from people that you thought were your friends because they don't recognise this person, because,
Mhm.
and it just contributes to this isolation and feeling of being a bit of a freak, which is so unkind and unfair, but it is a little bit how the world can make you feel.
I mean, I think if you've been used to sharing your bed for nearly 20 years with someone, then that gaping void on the other side of your bed
Mm,
is huge. And
mm,
that's not just emotionally, it's both physical, it's emotional, it's all of those things. And so we started Widow's Fire um, to create a space for people to openly. There are a lot of widows who aren't ready for a chapter two and shouldn't embark on a chapter two
mhm.
because they're not emotionally equipped to move to the next level and next stage. And so we could see the demand was there. So we've launched widowsfire.co.uk so that people can register their interest. They'll get a month's free premium access when it goes live, and it's a no strings. We all know why we're here, and we're all grown adults and consenting adults site. And I think in some ways that adds value to chapter two because it means that people won't be on chapter two for the wrong reasons.
Yeah.
The people who are on chapter two are usually, and not always, because there's no time frame, is there? Do you know what I mean? It's whenever people are ready to move forward, they decide to embark on chapter two. But if they're not ready for chapter two, then they can scratch an itch,
Mhm.
so to speak, which is probably a really terrible phrase. Sorry. Um, on Widow's Fire, and then as and when they are emotionally ready, they can come to chapter two. And I think it serves both sides well by keeping those audiences separate. And obviously,
Mm.
people can be a member of both. There's no problem with that. So some people will want a delicious distraction, as I put it, for a weekend. I embarked on a relationship. Well, no, I think the word relationship is probably a bit strong. I embarked on a fling with a guy, and it had no future. He knew it had no future. I knew it had no future. And his background was very different to mine. I wouldn't have gone out with him in public society, so to speak. But he was absolutely gorgeous and definitely served a purpose in my life at that point and made me feel like a woman again and made me feel sexy and human and, all of those things and made me forget the pain I was feeling. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think an emotional sticking plaster can occasionally be a good thing.
It's that hearing you say then, it made you feel like a woman again. And I do
Mm.
think that's a really important thing, especially because when you're widowed and you're a little bit older, than you were when you met your husband or your partner who
A
has
little
died.
bit.
And you maybe have a little less elasticity in your body, maybe, shall we say. You've had a few children, and you become very like, well, who's going to want me anyway? Like, I'm just this kind of broken shell of a human. Like, I was quite resolved to the fact that I was going to be alone forever, because I couldn't foresee how I would want to be with anybody. And then and then you sort of, you start poking your head above the parapet and, sort of thinking, oh, okay, what's going on over here? And very quickly, it's reassuring, I suppose, to know that you are still valid and you're still a woman and you are still allowed to have these urges and needs. Now, I need to just ask you, because with the chapter two site, do you screen? Like, do you have to prove that you're a widow to be
You
part of
do,
it?
yeah. So chapter two is, I'm really passionate about that being a safe, secure community for people who are dipping their toe into that
Yeah.
whole world.
Because we're very
So
vulnerable,
yeah,
aren't we? We're very vulnerable. And I think also,
yeah,
as soon as you say you're a widow, there is a type of kind of shark circling mentality
yeah, no, and they
over
do.
that.
I mean, there's always that, and that's kind of one of the reasons for starting chapter 2 is when do you tell people you're a
Mm,
widow? Like, because if you're meeting on mainstream dating sites, I've actually got widowed on my profile because it's like, well, if you can't deal with it, don't fucking come round. Um, but a lot of people don't, and I get that because they could be financially preyed on. Um, I'd like to think I'm more savvy than to know that's going on, but yeah. But if you meet someone on a first date, do you drop it at that point? I mean, it's a bit of
mm.
a romance killer, isn't it, to say the least? But yeah, we ask people to say the name of their late spouse, the date they died, and we ask them to send a link to a memorialized Facebook page, a copy of the death certificate, or a link to an obituary. And I vet, are we getting 20 to 30 registrations a day? I look at all of them every day because it's completely manageable for me. And also I'm really passionate about being all over this project. You know, I want it to be massively authentic, built by widows, for
Yeah.
widows and widowers is our kind of strapline.
It's here,
And
this sort of duty of care that you've taken
yeah, of
upon
course it
yourself, and
is.
it's very like what we do here. You know, we're very careful with our guests. We, you know, they listen to the episode before it goes out. They have full editorial autonomy on it because, much like you are. We know how vulnerable our tribe are, and you do feel this kind of obligation to take care of them.
It's a duty of care, you know,
Mm.
and I'm really passionate about defending and protecting my widows and widowers. And you know, there are other widow dating sites in the world, but they're all full of stock images of grey-haired old ladies.
That's not who we are, is it?
No, and silver foxes. I'm still looking for more
I
silver
found
foxes
one.
if anyone's listening. But yeah, so you know, I am hugely passionate about protecting them. Widow's Fire is slightly more whatever. You know, we're not gonna uh, have quite the same strict guidelines around that. Although there are guidelines of no rude photos, you
Yeah.
know,
I was going to
etc.
say, so it's, I mean, it's kind of like a Tinder for widows, is what kind
Yeah,
of saying.
basically. Yeah.
So, what is the driver to go to Widow's Fire rather than go to Tinder? And I'm playing devil's advocate here.
So Widow's Fire is casual, no strings attached hookup site,
Yeah.
if you like. But everyone on, you know, you're going to know that the people you're talking to are widows, so they get it, you know, because there is, you know, there's some complexity about even doing that as a widow, isn't there? Do you know what I mean? It's not straightforward. Our lives are not straightforward.
No.
We're fundamentally changed forever by the loss of someone we love.
Yeah.
And you know, that can translate right through life and into sex life and everything else. So I guess it's about creating a space that isn't Tinder, quite
Yeah.
frankly, because Tinder can be brutal as well, you know? Whereas I'd like to think there'll be less ghosting, less rude photos, etc. on Widow's Fire. You know what you're dealing with when you sign up. And then the other thing is that we rely on the community on both sides to self-police. So we have a block, we have a report function, etc. So that if anyone is behaving inappropriately, we will deal with it really quickly. So I had a lady on chapter 2 who had a couple of people that she wasn't happy with who emailed me on Sunday. I deleted them all immediately, you know, and I just think we want to try and create genuine communities with very clear boundaries of what both those communities are for. And then, you know, we help the community self-police, and we will police where we can.
So you're sort of facilitating this space for people and then sort of going, right, children, play nicely or you
Yes,
will not be able to play.
absolutely, yeah. Let's hope it's slightly better than my parenting style, but,
I think
yeah,
it sounds like you've
no.
done very well with your parenting. I think Finn sounds like he's
Thank
doing pretty
you.
damn well. Don't sell yourself short. Um, so primarily, this you describe this as being a hookup site, and I think why not? They exist for many other
Mhm.
dimensions of society. Why not create something for widows? Do you? I mean, interesting. Chapter 2. Do you have more men than women?
We do. Well, no, so the other way around. No, 90% of dating sites out there have 90% men, 10% women. And my developer was incredulous at how many women we've got signed up. So
Okay.
yeah, we have probably 70% women, 30% men. So the men are having an absolute ball. That's all on chapter 2. Um, and but then on Widow's Fire, it's about 50-50 at the moment.
Interesting.
So yeah, it's interesting. And we also did some, in fact, I'll share with you, I've got some really good research about, with chapter 2 we did a whole survey with 500 widows, um, to find out when people were ready to move forward, how they move forward, and we always move forward, not move on, and all the various logistics of dating and how that works. And then for Widows Fire, we did a slightly raunchier survey, which I'll share a blog post with you after this, yeah, which is really interesting. You know, sort of over 50% have bought their first sex toy. I think nearly 40% have thought about having relationships with the same sex
Mm,
rather than the opposite sex, which I think actually um, could maybe because it feels so different
yeah.
from. I don't know, there's something in that, but I'll share the stats with you. We did a survey and we've put that out to press this week, and I've been interviewed in various different
And I know
publications.
you've talked well about people becoming more sexually experimental or adventurous in
Yeah.
widowhood because I suppose, you're married for or in a relationship for a long time and then I don't know, maybe you just think, okay, well, I'm going to try something that either my spouse or partner was into, or I'm just going to have a look and see what's out there. And so perhaps it does prompt you to just go, all right, fuck it. I'm going to see what that's like and have a go.
Well, I think it's the live for the moment
Mm,
attitude, isn't
yeah.
it? We as widows know that life can change in a heartbeat,
Yeah. Literally.
and therefore, why would you not carpe diem, make the most of every day, etc. So yeah, I do think it does make, and also as widows, the majority of us are 40 plus and hitting our sexual prime. In reality, you're feeling more confident, you're feeling more sure of who you are. God, I wouldn't like to go back to being a teenager. Do you know what I mean? This is all right, actually.
Yeah, I agree. And I think because of how vulnerable we are, particularly, that first year or two, to kind of create something that's as safe as it can be for widows so they can go and explore that side of their personality that, they're very interested in doing, but they don't really know how to do it or where to go. And the other thing is, I think probably worth mentioning is that the widow community is fairly small. And so you probably find that if anybody does behave, in a not very respectful or nice way, that everybody finds out.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, and it is. Yeah, I mean, it's not that small. It's 3 million widows in the
My
UK,
goodness, are there? You'd
sadly.
think I'd know that, what with running a widow podcast. 3 million of them.
Well, you do
I
now.
do know.
3.11 actually. But the sad reality is that you know uh, more people are widowed or widowers every
I
day.
hear
So
so regularly. I get people contacting me because somebody they know has lost a partner, and it is just heartbreaking. And I almost missed the
it's
time when I thought it was really unusual, and that I was a complete anomaly. Because what you realise is it's not that unusual. It's fortunately it's not that prevalent either, but. It's yeah, we aren't alone in this. There's 3 million of us, right?
yeah.
I'm going to pretend I knew that. I might cut out when you told me there were 3 million and leave that in. Well, Nikki, it's been an eye opener and an absolute pleasure to talk to you today.
Oh,
I'm really glad that we got to touch on these apps because I do, the first question I think people have is, well, isn't that what Tinder's for? And actually, to hear the reasons why and how you are, this kind of duty of care that you feel towards the widow community, I wish you all the luck, and I wish everybody that joins the app, I wish you lots of delicious distractions, as Nick calls them.
Indeed. I know. The irony being, I've built a dating app out of necessity because I wasn't getting much joy on Tinder, and now I can't
You can't
actually
use it.
use it, because I feel like it's an absolute conflict. And my favourite joke of the moment is I can't look on my own back end because it feels dirty. But yeah, it's that sort of, it feels wrong to be trying to siphon off the best ones for
Yeah, I get
myself
it's
or
like
whatever. No, I don't. I'm back on Tinder and having zero results. But anyway, chapter 2 is my chapter 2 right now. So that's giving me, I always say, like, if I can help some people find some joy, that helps me make sense of my
yeah.
loss, and it does. I think Andy would find it hysterical that I'm making money out of grief. I mean, he would just absolutely be howling laughing at that concept. And I think he'd be dead proud. So there's that legacy as well. And my son is forever mortified at my press articles. But as I pointed out to him yesterday, that's your inheritance, darling. So
It normalizes it because, again, our parents' generation didn't talk to us about sex. We do nothing.
yeah.
So having a more open dialogue about death, like we do, but also about things like sex, it is important. I don't necessarily want to have too frank a conversation with my job, but there, I don't want it to be this horrible taboo subject.
Yeah.
That nobody talks about because sex, death, they're two fairly fundamental parts of being human, aren't they?
Aren't they? Well, they're the reason we're here, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, amongst other things. But yeah, no, thank you so much for covering this and us and talking to me. And
Well, I'm very interested. I'm interested in all aspects of this, of widowhood and grief, and hearing you talk about taking your trauma and your grief and turning it into your career. It's basic, and if you can't find what you need out there, you create it, don't you? And I felt that for me personally, had this podcast existed, I would have listened and I would have thought, oh, okay, there's a little bit of hope. People go through the most awful things, and it doesn't mean that you're immune from tragedy and loss and heartbreak, but you can, there is joy and hope out there, and
yeah.
that's sort of what I want to project with this. And you are a beacon of that. You have turned a huge tragedy into something that hopefully will help others find, if not love, then at the very least some comfort in all this. So thank you
or a delicious distraction,
a delicious
indeed.
distraction. That sounds lovely, actually. Well, on that note, I will let you go. But thank you once again for talking to me.
A pleasure.
And
Thank
thank
you.
you, everyone listening.